just by way of context again, Dhruv is that dynamic entrepreneur that all of us as investors are looking for, who have purpose at the heart of their businesses and are looking for capital to really scale the impact that we as investors want to see. Nirav is that dynamic GP, the private equity impact investor who is and using debt in Africa as well now to try and drive access to finance for exactly the kind of entrepreneurs that Dhruv is like, though Kai's Invest focus a lot on education. For me, I span both sides, having come from the GP side and still on the IC of a GP, and also having sat on the investment committee of an LP for many years. And so with that, I'm going to launch straight into the conversation. And I'll start with you, Dhruv, because you are that most fundamental sort of atom that we are all trying to cluster around. When we look at impact, what is it that you seek to be able to even tell an entrepreneur, tell an investor of the impact that your business is having, yet balance that conversation with what what may be coming from the other side in terms of expectations?
I think it's very important to set the expectations clear from the word get-go, because unfortunately investors do have unreasonable expectations, and that's the reality. I personally believe an impact-driven organization and an organization that has impact at the core may not be able to give you those kind of ridiculous IRR returns many times. There may be outliers in the system, and that's okay. But if you see certain companies, they cannot give you a 30-40% IRR. And I'll be very blunt here. Investors want that kind of a return. I know Nirav is laughing as I'm speaking, but if an investor says, no, I'm okay, I'm happy with a 10-15% return, don't buy that, please. It's not going to happen. So I think LPs and GPs also really need to do a deep soul searching and try to understand what are their expectations from the entrepreneurs, because on the face of it, they will say X and they will do Y. I'll say something here which is very, very mean and will hurt a lot of people, but I'll say it because the conversation needs to be blunt. A traditional VC once told me that at least we VCs are blunt on your face and we tell you that we want a very high growth hockey stick trajectory. But a social VC is a devil in disguise. He wants that, but he will never tell you that. And that really, really hit me. So I personally feel that this conversation regarding impact and scale and IRR, giving an entrepreneurial perspective, it's LPs really need to decide what they want. I really feel they're confused. That's where I come from.
Dhruv, thanks very much. So Nirav, would you agree with that? Because you're facing pressure from both ends of the spectrum, from your LPs as well as the entrepreneurs. And you are, I'm sure, trying your best to be an honest broker in all of this. How do you manage those often divergent perspectives?
I think Dhruv made some fantastic comments, and I'm very glad that he made this blunt opening, because in many ways he reflects the ground reality. But let me put things in perspective, right? I mean, we've been having double entry bookkeeping system since what, the 15th century? And there was a focus on accounting standards since what, after the Great Depression, 1930s. And I suppose the FASB was set up in the 1973. And we still haven't been able to come up with accounting standards that could satisfy everybody, that could prevent malpractices. So I think we need to be more realistic in our expectations from impact standards and impact measures. It's not going to happen overnight. It's a long journey, first of all. Second, I think there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from what has been seen in the world of financial standards, right? LPs must learn that it is more important to have right-minded people than right kind of templates. Templates can be gamed, measures can be gamed. So unless you have the right set of people who are in this business, things are not going to move forward. And therefore, at all levels, whether it's at the level of the entrepreneur, at the selection of the GP, or the GP selection of the investors, most important thing is to focus on like-minded people. Everything else will then fall in place. The world of impact investing also has, I believe, taught us some very important lessons. In my mind, the most important one is yes, there is a certain amount of elegance to standardization, but what we need to keep in mind is that what sometimes is most critical to measure may be vastly different from case to case. And therefore, templates can only be a good starting point, but there's a glaring need in the world of impact investing to have the flexibility to be able to customize, to look at the situation on hand and tell ourselves that so what if this measure is something that I have never come across before? So what if it will mean that it'll add one more line to my Excel sheet of templates? But if this is what really matters in this particular situation, then that is what deserves to be monitored. For example, every impact investment has a very significant local context. Now, uh, to give a real life example of what we went through, when we started Edu Finance, our core segment was K to 12. And then we go to South Africa and we realize that the priority for that country, priority for the government of that country is early childhood development. We'd not done early childhood development and Edu Finance, we'd never put them together. But that's what was the need of the hour, and that's what we had to do. That also meant that we had to come up with very specific assessment methodologies that we had not tried before. We had to use the South African standard, the early learning outcome measurement standard. But that is the kind of flexibility that the impact investing world will call for. Thank you, Geeta.
Thank you very much, Nirav. Now let's go back to something, a little ball that Dhruv kicked into play. Let's talk about returns, because the other side, when we talk about impact investing, we focus a lot on the impact, but what we don't often talk about is the returns, the investing part, and what the expectation is on the returns. And maybe this is what lies inherent within Dhruv's comment about the hidden devil, because there's an expectation without that being as openly spoken about. And we play with three things, right? When it comes to impact investing, we play with the two things which are normal, regardless of what asset class, which is risks and return. And then we throw in impact. And having these in some form of agreed balance is always challenging. So, do we need to just start off with the presumption that returns when it comes to impact investing should actually not be expected to be as high as in so-called non-impact investing, without putting any limits on the GPs or the intermediaries, but making sure that there isn't a compounding of the return expectation that goes from the LP to the GP, and then the GP to the entrepreneur, especially where the investment sizes we are investing are not large enough or sufficiently warranting us to put in place any sort of hedging. So you are often having a mismatch in currency as well, right? You're investing in a hard currency into an entrepreneur who is running a business in the local currency that is relevant for them. So even when you're asking Dhruv for even a 10 or 15% net return, given the kind of volatility we've seen in our markets over the last 10 to 12 years, you're asking, that means for us as investors, we're asking you as an entrepreneur to grow the top line of your business on average 8 to 10 times within, say, a 3 to 5 year period. So I wanted to just lay that context out a little bit, because I want to ask you first, Dhruv, if you are placed with those obligations, number one, do you take the money from the investor? Number two, how else do you finance the growth of your business and still stay on target? You just talked to us about increasing the scope of the disabilities for the people that you are working with, which is a core part of your business. How do you even have the roadway to do that in the absence of what is meant to be truly patient capital?
I think what works for us is that you need to have the investor on the same page, that look, this is what we can do, and this is what we are great at. And at the cost of doing this, return may get affected, so-called. I also do believe that being a for-profit company and a for-profit social enterprise, it's a business first, and I've taken time to understand on that front on a personal note. Our narrative also has changed. Our narrative was very socially driven, and I realized that that is good to a certain section of people, but to the wider audience, it does not really click. So our narrative has changed from a social enterprise as such just to a business enterprise, and that hires people with disabilities. Coming back to returns, Geeta, I think it's honestly, I don't have an answer for it. There are all kinds of people. You will get people who do understand what you're trying to do and will be happy with a lesser return. But but the expectation of return will always be there because that's the way the model is structured. LP will give to a GP, and there is fund, there is money. So expectations tend to kick in. The issue that I have is that you are being or that impact driven organization is being compared with a regular startup. That is something which I struggle with. But as things are changing around us, it will be compared. You are a startup tomorrow, and LP has two organizations that he has to fund. He will definitely fund that on a more on a rocket ship. Take Byju's for an example. So then the entrepreneur has to ask himself or herself that question: that what happens to my impact? And have I taken a hit on the impact because I have to now run? I have to run like a horse. So these are tough questions, and I don't have an answer for them, to be honest with you. I mean, I think I'll never get an answer in my lifetime. The first thing is to get a right investor on board who understands this dilemma. You just can't have an investor who just whips you and tells you to start running. That can't really happen in an impact-driven organization, is what my sense is. But
Definitely.
your obligation to give return to an investor stays. You take the money, you gotta give it back. Now you give it at 5% or 10%, that's your business model and your conversation. But you gotta give the money back. That's how equity works. Simple.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dhruv. Nirav, I'm going to take you back to one of the questions we had previously discussed. Sorry, Nirav and Dhruv, I know I've taken us a little bit off piste. So thanks for being good sports and continuing on this. But Nirav, I'm going to ask you: do you feel that LPs are asking for too much in terms of either standardization on one side or the other side in terms of, you know, trying to simplify what can often be, as you said, a more complex description of what it is the collective impact of a diverse portfolio will have, and how do you manage those challenges, especially as you're going through a fundraising exercise to raise a new fund, and you have different LPs who come with different requirements.
Sure, Geeta. So before I get there, I just want to continue from where Dhruv left, and I sort of I once again agree with him that it's very difficult to compare financial returns in impact-oriented businesses with uh, regular businesses, so to speak. Uh, I mean, look at it this way, right? You let's say have a business which is burning fossil fuels and creating all kinds of problems. And now you have another business which is trying to sort of make do for the damage that has been created. Are you going to expect similar financial returns from both the businesses? But that's how the world works today, right? And the problem in that approach is that it's not the impact standards alone which are evolving. It's also our financial standards which need to evolve. What is our definition of profit? We keep talking about returns. What is our definition of returns? When these returns, which are today only financial, get balanced for the damage that is caused in the long term, will the returns still continue to look as attractive? I'm not sure, right? So, classic case of in our hurry to templatize things, standardize things, come up with measures. We've come up with half-baked measures in the world of finance, which do not take the full impact of our action into account. And that is where the issue is. Ideally, someday, financial measures and impact measures should come together. The problem is we've got financing, which is short-term oriented, and that applies to both businesses that are financial return seeking, but also to businesses that are impact return seeking, Whereas impact return seeking businesses need very patient capital, very long term capital. And that's where I believe the mismatch is. Now, coming to the point that you made in terms of whether LPs are being unreasonable or asking too many questions, well, you know, to be fair to LPs, there has to be an element of unreasonability in our scheme of things to push the envelope forward. Because unless somebody is asking for high returns, there isn't any push on us as GPs to actually try harder to find opportunities to achieve that balance that is being sought. Will that balance always be achieved? No, the answer is no. Fortunately, we work primarily with DFIs, and there is a fairly high degree of tolerance there and understanding in terms of the fact that this balance will take a long time for us to reach. All that they want to see at this point in time is that everybody is moving in the right direction. And I do believe that that level of push is important for all of us to exert ourselves harder.
Nirav, thank you very much. For everyone who's on the call, just a note to say that we will be launching three very quick polls to get a sense of where your thinking is going on a few issues. So the first poll is shortly going to come up on your screen. But Nirav, what I'm also going to say is, in terms of the LPGP relationship, the reality is there is a mechanism, right, which is meant to onward spur the ambitions of the GP, and that's carry. So there is actually something there. The first fund I worked on was the first fund that IFC had ever invested in, where there was an impact carry. And it really made a difference, I can definitely say, in terms of what we were looking at on a quarter by quarter basis, because there was a direct line back to compensation, right, beyond the valuation of the businesses and the expected returns. And this was, investing in what was Africa's first health fund and the first base of the pyramid fund. But interestingly enough, a lot of LPs have shied away from that structure subsequently, including the development finance institutions. And I wonder whether there may really be a scope to re-enter some of these discussions to try and better align expectations and performance across those three axes: returns, deliberate sought out impact, and the third is risk. And what I mean by risk is steering GPs away from trying to focus on safe businesses, because we see this, right, in the same way we see LPs chasing after safe GPs or considered safe GPs with less volatility. So if we're going to bring a systemic change within a sector, as I know you guys are at Kai's Invest, and you're looking at healthcare, at education, apologies, you're able to have a significant diversification, which is rewarded in the right way, as opposed to rewarded in the wrong way, where you are just focusing on those businesses which you think are going to be, frankly, the most profitable, but actually not move the needle, right? So that was one thing I just wanted to bring up. We are moving way too quickly right now. So in about 1 minute, we are going to be pulled across into 3 breakout rooms. And we will make sure that we will sort of go straight into the next piece of the discussion, which is a quick case study on Byju's. And the intention is to try and address how it is the story of Byju's can be told in terms of balancing these points that we've talked about. What is it LPs want to hear? What is it a GP wants to hear? What is it, if you put yourself into the shoes of a business like Byju, you would want to express as being the impact that you are having. The poll results are available, as you can see on your screen. The question is, how well do you believe your organization effectively uses data to represent the impact of your business, if you're an entrepreneur, or your portfolio as an investor? Interestingly enough, only 13% of the people who have voted said very well. 66% say we need to improve. 22% say credible. So we clearly have a ways to go in terms of getting to where we want to get into. So with that, Cypriot, I may ask for your help, please, to do the magic and split us up into the 3 rooms, please. Welcome back, everybody, to the main room. We're all together again. We've got roughly about 12 minutes left, and what we're intending to do with this last session, piece of the session, is have a quick 2 minutes from Jayanth and Vani, updating what had happened and the discussions in their own groups. I will give a 2-minute update in terms of our own, and then we'll take some Q&A. So please do keep the questions coming in the chat window. Jayanth, I'm going to hand over to you first.
Thank you. We had a very lively group, so I was barely keeping up in terms of the comments that were coming in. May I quickly share my screen, if that's okay?
Sure, go for it.
Yeah. I hope all of you can see the screen.
Yeah.
So as you can see, we covered everything successfully, and I think there are more comments coming in as well. But let me probably take it from with the impact metric from the perspective of LPs. I think the general consensus that we had was that the company has done really well in tier 2, 3, and 4 cities. So how can you disaggregate that more? How can you show that growth is actually coming from these rural economies? That is a big point. Growth in terms of tiers. There's also comments in terms of unique learners registered and age profiles from a perspective of an LP. And moving to C, which is in terms of metric from a perspective of business. A lot of great comments here again. I think one point was how do you assess the retention rate of learners moving beyond improvement in performance? How do you do that? And an excellent point which also came across was how do we know the engagement time of children and parents using the application and not just children alone? The average age of student enrolled, I think there was a comment where someone mentioned it's fantastic to see the children locked in along with the growth of the business from kindergarten to 12. The engagement levels are really high. So more comments there. When we discussed about which voice needs to be represented more, there was comments in terms of there needs to be gender disaggregation in terms of data, and also in terms of socioeconomic data, number of first generation learners, the story post learning, how do they cope with that? And someone also said education is more than just grades. That is a great point as well. We tried to bring that all together in terms of a quick narrative for A. And I think the strapline we came up with is Byju's is an affordable private tutor for achieving your academic dreams. So that is one part. I'm sure there's a second part of that. And I think there was focus on soft skills and tech skills as well. That's from our group. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dhruv. And Vani, if I can pass it over to you to summarize the discussion within your own group. Okay, so while we're waiting for Vani to...
Sorry, my apologies, I was on mute.
Go ahead, Vani, please. You've got 2 minutes.
Okay, so I'm sharing my screen as well. Please let me know if there's if you can't see it. But we had a very interesting conversation. There were some interesting points brought up. I think one of the most interesting ones was about the fact that Byju's, wants to make learning fun and engaged, but then if they're still using grades as a way to, I think it comes to Jay's point, if they're still using grades as a way to measure progress, then how is this any different from traditional learning as well? It was a great point to bring up. So some of the things that we looked at was, from the narrative perspective, the fact that, education is fun, we want to make it increasingly engaged, simplifying subjects, making them more relatable to real life experiences, and also the whole COVID situation. So the fact that, you can have an online tutor and not need to bring someone into your household. So health and safety issues also being managed at home, and overall that it's cheaper. And the fact that Byju's is in the end ultimately focused on ensuring quality of learning. One of the points that kind of straddled both A and C was also accessibility. So the fact that it's easily, that you can actually easily get, if you've got access to internet, you can actually access it from home. So some of the points under LPs were, jobs break down by gender, students, break down by age and gender, and also amount of engagement time. Sorry, let me just expand this a bit. So a great point that was also brought up under the business is what percentage of students are meeting or exceeding expected national and state standards and averages and expected levels where they should be against international standards as well. There should be also peer evaluation, which is not something that's commonly assessed in India or globally. Also keeping in mind that, inclusivity. So the fact that it's available across tier 2, 3, 4 cities means that students can can access it regardless of gender, age, and so on. And I think one of the last points that I will just quickly bring up is under point D was using grades, as I said, is it an effective measure of the methodology? Also providing virtual parent-teacher meetings would be an interesting way to go.
Great, thank you, Vani. There's a comment from Ashkar saying we tried it, it worked for us. However, don't overdo it. It would be the advice, as it creates an extraneous variable that affects the end result that you are after. Fair point. So what I am going to do now is just quickly share my own screen so that you are able to see what our team were discussing from Project Komodo. I think we ended up with folks who had two areas they were really focused on. One is the business side of things, and the other is the technology side of things. And here, there was one comment in particular, which I thought was very interesting. It's important to understand whether this is an impact investment business or an impact returns business, because that governs and guides what it is you are saying you're doing, the impact that you're having, and what it is the returns that you're expecting in terms of the impact itself. Two things I'll just quickly mention here is to what extent here are we talking about the curriculum driving the outcomes and the quality of learning versus and especially given the what is available in the freemium in the free model versus the paid for model, or is there doubling down on certain coursework which is thought to be more sort of revenue generating by those who are paying for this. We were also talking here about the quality of the learning, and I can see this has come up in the other two groups as well. So please feel free to, the links are available. We'll make the links available for the end to the end of the day if people want to go back and add some information. Absolutely happy for that to happen. So we've got time, I think, for maybe one or two quick questions before we must wrap up here. And so what I'm going to ask is for Nirav and Jayant, I'm going to give the two of you the last word. So I'm happy for you to take a question. I will give you a couple of the questions, or feel free to just wrap up with your final thoughts. Nirav, this time I'm going to start with you here. Is there a particular approach? I mean, education is your thing. It has been your thing for decades. Is there a particular approach here that you feel is important to represent as an investor when it comes to impact measurement, impact monitoring?
Sure. Certainly. I think the most important thing is context. In education, you look at access, quality, and relevance. Do I have a school that I can go to? Do I like to go to the school that I'm going to? Is my school preparing me to contribute to my personal growth and the growth of the society that I live in? And various countries, various learning stages are at different stages of evolution. It's extremely important to ask the stage relevant questions. Otherwise, there is a risk that we'll be left with very generic measures like, have we built a school for everybody? And we'll fall into the trap that government spend has mostly fallen into, which is just focusing on building classrooms.
Thank you so much, Nirav. Dhruv, I'm going to pass it over to you.
I have a question. I have a question for Nirav, actually. I just want to ask him, is he an investor in Byju's?
I'm not actually. We have not invested in Byju's, but in the interest of full transparency, we've invested in a company, Topper, which competes with Byju's.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Sorry, Geeta, what was the question?
Any final thoughts from you, Dhruv?
No, I think again, the way of how we started the conversation, that impact as a space and impact measurement of a space, we have to strike a balance of fluidity and standardization. I really liked Nirav's point of that you have to be slightly fluid in this whole idea, because it's very culturally driven. Context. My impact or Miracle's impact in India would be very different than doing an impact in the US or in Africa for that matter. So I think it's, but we definitely, the academia and the academic world has to move forward in the direction that what is impact measurement at the end of the day. just like this buzzword of social entrepreneur. And I'm questioning that whole idea of social entrepreneurship. Why aren't entrepreneurs called social entrepreneurs? I think there has to be more, everybody has to come together and come up with better quality answers. It's a bit up in the air right now for me. But it's a great session. I think the conversations like this always help.
Thank you, Dhruv. And I really appreciate the openness and honesty, or blunt, not honesty, because
Yes.
yeah, I feel you are always honest. It's more the bluntness you brought to this conversation, both you and Nirav, and it's not easy to peel back these layers. Everybody, thank you so much. There's a second poll that we put up. You can see the responses on there in terms of the common issues, in terms of showcasing impact. And the first one that's been selected is there's a lack of relevance of what is measured to the business. And again, if you look at the it's by a large mile, a country mile, that this has come up as being the top answer, and that it's hard to account for the qualitative impact achieved over the quantitative. So it comes back to not everything which should be not everything that is counted counts, and not everything that counts is counted. Thank you, everybody, for your time, your interest today. Nirav and Dhruv, once again, thank you so much. Andy, thank you for having us, and I wish you a good rest of the conference.